In my recent video, I got into jazz articulation on the clarinet and other reed instruments, and how, for me personally, I've found ghost tonguing to be a good solution for my jazz articulation on the clarinet. What I've found, if you've seen the videos where I play all kinds of different wind instruments, you'll see that I play a lot of them, and it the same things don't work for each instrument. Flute, I wouldn't even know how to apply this kind of ghost tonguing thing. Um, Trumpet, I'm still figuring out what I like. And saxophone too, to some extent. But the ghost tonguing thing for me is particularly good for clarinet, especially coming from, even though I always loved jazz clarinet first. From high school on, I was always getting pressured to learn, the classical way. And if you learn that way of articulation, it does take some adjustment to make it sound like jazz. And I think the ghost tonguing might be a good solution. But I've really only gotten into it to the degree that I'm doing now about 2 or 3 years ago, because I started thinking about how anytime someone's complimented me on my feel, it's been when I've used at least some ghost tonguing. I thought, well, I really should get used to that and use it more. The only one of my albums where I use it much at all is on Time Made to Swing, and so I think that's my best playing because the feel is actually better. So anyhow, what made me put off doing it is that, like double tonguing on the clarinet, when you get to the second register, it can sound very obnoxious and like a duck, right? And what I realized is I was ghost tonguing way too hard. I do a lot of things on the clarinet too hard. Some about my physical instincts on everything. I overdo everything, and so um, ghost tonguing. That might be why ghost tonguing is like a solution for me, because it turns the tongue, instead of a battering ram or a silencer on and off switch, it becomes a mute, like a straight mute for a trumpet. So to get used to that, and especially to use it at all for register key pushed registers, you have to get used to the idea that you're going to put your tongue down, but make sure you still hear note leaking out. So what I would do is pick a note per region of the clarinet register and just try to get used to that. So especially for higher registers, you do run the risk of having a note crack here and there. Um, but I think for jazz, that's perfectly fine, because in jazz, we really value hearing evidence that someone's taking a chance and struggling, something that AI will never have, right? We want to hear that going for it kind of feel. But in any case, you just have to really train yourself. I think you do have to do it a little differently for the upper register. Um, I feel like where my tongue is doing it is a little different when I go up there. So in my video about jazz articulation with normal tonguing for the offbeats, and then the John McNeil thing of twos and threes, I went over a couple of examples for practicing those things on scales or patterns or whatever. So what I realized is I should show that then with ghost tonguing, you can also do that. So with ghost tonguing, if you want the accents to be in the offbeats, you need to put your muting tongue down on the downbeats. And you can play around with it to see, are my accents jumping out too much or too little? And you might have to adjust how you want those notes to pop out. So if you do tongue the off beats, that would accent the down beats. And it's kind of a misconception, almost like devil's advocate. There's a lot of that in jazz education, that you never accent downbeats. What would a bass player even do without downbeats, right? Quarter notes. So anyhow, so then with the twos and threes thing, you can start off with just threes. How about let's reverse it though? Let's accent the third of each three. So what you have to get used to is the note pops out when you release the tongue, pull it back. It's the opposite of what we do in classical and stuff, I guess, sort of. But still, I find it, unless you're trying to play really fast, I just find that it's more doable and less exhausting than constant air huffing. Because I think clarinet especially, it takes a fair amount of pressure just to have an even sound all the time. And if you're trying to always go up and down in volume and size and all that, yeah, it just gets exhausting, and you either lose a little tone or you don't use dynamics, which, ironically, for all the classical clarinetists who tried to tell me I don't use dynamics, if you listen to a clarinetist play Mozart, like the famous ones, even on YouTube or whatever, Sabine Meyer or whatever, I don't really hear any evidence of big dynamics. I know that's Mozart, but even in other styles, and it's because the clarinet is a fragile instrument. If you do anything too extreme, it can get obnoxious or the tone can get messed up. Now in jazz, klezmer, all these other styles, that's okay. You can actually go for it. But I think in modern jazz, because the two musics kind of keep influencing each other, Western classical and jazz, there is some pressure, especially after guys like Eddie Daniels, even Buddy DeFranco and Benny Goodman established that sound. Everyone kind of expects clarinet now to sound like it's got that nice tone. So yeah, but anyhow, uh, you could do the other 2 and 3 type stuff. Let's see. So another example. Now, this is still the usual jazz dynamics that we all work on, where it's mostly just swallowed or muted notes, ghosted notes with hit notes, right? More like an articulation, note per note, or groups of notes, whatever. As opposed to arc dynamics, these things in classical. And what's interesting is I've tried to use this to widen my dynamic range, because now if I play soft and have my mute tongue down, it's even softer. And then if I accent and I'm playing loud, that'll seem even louder. Also, another thing I want to mention is one reason I put off practicing or using ghost tongue too much is the idea in my head that it has an ugly sound. It is true you hear more of the noise in your sound, like, and a little bit of the, stuff like that sometimes. Um, but to you, the player, since you're hearing your jaw vibration sound and everything, you're hearing extra noise. And what I found out by listening back to myself is in some ways the mute tongue is a very pure, pretty sound. It's just hard to control up high. That was all with the tongue on the reed, okay? Without it, so you can hear the difference. All right, so you can experiment with trying to use at least a little bit of arc dynamics with the ghost tongue down. For example. So if you mix it all up, you could get all kinds of interesting things, I guess, to me. So, so anyhow, that's how you can get used to ghost tongue and train yourself to accept it as a clarinetist.